Welcome, friends. My name is Frances, and it is my pleasure and honor to introduce this June 2026 First Monday lecture. As many of you know, Pendle Hill is located on Lenape land on what is now known as Wallingford, Pennsylvania. This year, Pendle Hill is celebrating our 95th anniversary as an ongoing experiment in spiritual learning community. Today, we are living into a new iteration of this experiment. Our lecturer, Kody Gabriel, is joining us, accompanied by their own elders and community, at the Albuquerque Friends Meeting on the lands of the Tiwa-speaking people. Ever since the pandemic began, I've been hungry to use the magic of Zoom to bring together communities as well as individuals. And I'm really grateful to be experimenting with this new format and also for all of your patience with whatever technical challenges it may occasion. On that note, a few brief tech details. I'm joined tonight by Pendle Hill staff and guests, including Maddie, who's now assisting with tech and will be helping with the Q&A afterwards. If you have any technical difficulties or questions tonight for friends online, please message tech support and they'll do their best to support you. You may have also noticed that we are live streaming this video to our YouTube channel, Pendle Hill USA. In the coming days, we will send out a link to the recording along with resources from tonight to everyone who has registered for the program. If you are joining us and you have not yet individually registered, welcome. Please go to pendlehill.org/learn and sign up tonight for tonight's lecture so you can receive the follow-up resources. We've also enabled live transcription, so you will be able to access closed captioning. And as I mentioned, at the end of the lecture, we'll have an opportunity for a question and answer with Kody. As always, we remain grateful to the Friends Foundation for the Aging, whose support to Pendle Hill allows us to continue making our First Monday lectures and other online offerings free to friends of all ages. With that, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for tonight. Kody Gabriel, he, is a friend currently living on the lands of Tiwa-speaking people in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Their service in Quaker community spaces has included youth work, pastoral care, workshop facilitation, public speaking, and writing. Kody is passionate about the intersections of spirituality, justice, and joy. His new project, Trans Youth Coaching, provides advocacy, education, and no-cost support sessions for transgender youth and their families. On a personal note, I am so moved and grateful to have gotten to work with Kody for the last several years as a leader for the intergenerational LGBTQ Dreaming Sanctuary program. And this past year, as we've expanded the offerings of that program, when we began the program, we knew how crucial it was to have a space for the LGBTQ community to come together, to imagine what sanctuary might be like for each other. And in the last several years, that need has become ever more pressing, and I have been ever more grateful for Kody for being one of the grounding voices that helps us learn what it means to create sanctuary for each other in this time. I'm really looking forward, Kody, to learning with you tonight. And with that, I'll invite us into worship again. And from the silence, Kody will share his message.
I'm recovering from a cold, so I'm not going to speak a lot louder than this tonight. If anybody has trouble hearing, seats on this side are both closer to the speaker and also closer to the screen for reading closed captions. In my preparation for this talk, I wrote down the words that I was given in advance, and I didn't write down any words that I wasn't given in advance. And I'm holding openness to adding or changing from what I've written down. This is a message of love across space and time. It's a message to 30 years ago me, a kid with a deep sense of being different from other kids, but without the language or understanding to express that in relation to gender. It's a message to 20 years ago me, an out trans teenager navigating ignorance, acceptance, and growing self-understanding. It's a message to yesterday and tomorrow me, to the inner 5-year-old and 10-year-old and 15-year-old Kodys who are always a part of me. This is a message of love across space and time. It's a message to you who have ever questioned who people told you that you were, who have spoken a truth about yourself that others could not yet see, who have spent hours or weeks or years trying to understand. To the confused, vulnerable, brave, clear, angry, afraid, joyful, gender nonconforming child you were or are or might someday be. This is a message of love for this space and time. For trans, non-binary, genderqueer, and gender nonconforming kids, figuring out how to live in a time when there is both more recognition of and more animosity towards trans people than there has been at maybe any other time in history. If none of those people sound like you, this is an invitation to listen deeply. This message does not center you. It may not use the language you are most familiar with or answer all of your questions, but it also does not exclude you. I want to talk about 3 things today. First, the connections that I've experienced in my life between Quaker spirituality and trans experience. Feels important to me because there's so little mainstream discourse about trans people and religion that is positive. Second, I want to talk about the beauty and sacredness of trans people for the same reason. And I want to close with reflecting on how we stay whole in the face of oppression and win the struggle for trans liberation. One of the defining features of Quakerism is that we don't have a creed or a statement of belief that all members have to agree to in order to be Quaker. It doesn't mean that we don't believe anything. We have a process that some of you will be familiar with, in which we write down an expression of our beliefs, many regional communities of Quakers, in a book that we call Faith and Practice. And the difference between writing our beliefs down in a book like Faith and Practice and having a creed is a difference between a proscriptive process and a descriptive process. Instead of a creed that tells us these are the parameters that your beliefs must fit into, we have a document that is, to the extent that it's a joke among friends, constantly being revised in order to reflect our ongoing learnings about what we believe as a community. And as I reflect on that, it feels so similar to the vision that I have for gender liberation, which is that instead of the boxes that people give us that tell us this is who you must be and how you must fit into the category that you were born into, that we have a process in which we describe to one another the truth of our experience as it unfolds for us. And I deeply believe that this process, which I have referred to in the name of the talk as non-creedal gender, has the potential to be liberatory for every person, particularly for trans people, but for every person who has any kind of relationship with gender, which is, at this point in our culture, the way it is, everyone. We are all more free if we get to describe and examine what we experience and share it with one another instead of trying to squeeze into, this is what I have always been told I must be. And I want to invite us to imagine what might be possible in our experience of spirituality, as well as our experience of gender, and in every other way that we connect with ourselves and other people. What might be possible when we simply describe our experience rather than trying to force it to conform to other people's descriptions and definitions? Another powerful connection point that I see between the experience of trans people and Quaker spirituality is Quaker emphasis on continuing revelation. Quakers see truth as something that unfolds over time in relationship with the holy. On the communal level, that means our faith encourages us to look at new perspectives and experiences as giving us a new window into the sacred. It's very different from religious traditions that condemn trans identities or anything else that they believe to be new or non-traditional. I think it's also important to add here that that perception of trans identities is wrong. Trans people have always existed, and we are visible in the historical record. But there is still this conception that trans identity is new and therefore not to be trusted. But Quakers have invented a whole religion around the idea that something is not less trustworthy because it's a new idea to us. We have a deep respect for emerging truths that change our perspective. And I believe that that means that if somebody's understanding of their gender changes and they share that with us, the most Quaker possible response to that is to say, wow, cool, thanks for showing me something new about the divine. On a personal level, as I think about continuing revolution, Pendle Hill has a program called Continuing Revolution, which is very dear to me. But what I meant to say was continuing revelation. As I reflect on continuing revelation, I'm also struck by parallels between Quaker practices and how trans folks figure out our genders. If you spend a lot of time in trans-related social media groups, one of the most common questions you'll see people asking is, how do I know if I'm trans? And on one level, the answer to that is mostly cis people don't go to Reddit asking how they would know if they were trans. But actually, how do we know? My biggest realizations about gender were a long time ago. But I still remember the experience in flashes of image and feeling. I remember late night Google searches. I remember standing in front of my bathroom mirror trying on a binder for the first time. I remember telling my chorus director that I needed to change my concert uniform. Something in me at each of those moments recognized a spark of truth, and so I stepped towards it. And then I noticed how that made me feel. peaceful, excited, nervous. And then I waited to be clear about the next step. And a key part of Quaker practice is the search for what action we believe the divine is calling us to take. How do we figure that out? We wonder, we examine our intuition, we test something and see how it feels. We figure out what feels true. And in my experience as a friend, it's often difficult to explain how we know what we know. We might describe our sense of divine leading as an emotional or physical sensation or a thought, but I think it goes beyond that. I think it touches the way in which our relationship with ourselves and each other and the holy are transformed when we encounter something true, the capital T, truth. Quakers have said from the beginning of our movement that direct connection to the holy is not dependent on any human characteristic. That includes age, which means believing that children have the capacity to understand and give voice to truth. And the rest of the world has a whole rubric for assessing whose knowledge of themselves can be trusted, and therefore who should have the right to self-determination. And children rank very low on that list. Legally, we respond to children's unique developmental needs by treating them very much like the property of their parents. We assume that adults know better than children, not only about the world as a whole, but also about children's own identities and experiences. And so much of the controversy that we're seeing in the world right now is founded on that conception of children's lack of knowledge of what is true. But Quakers have always understood children to have an equal connection to the holy and therefore to truth. This is an area in which I think Quakers can have a powerful voice on issues impacting trans young people. We can stand up and say, it is our witness that children have deep relationships with truth. Without their perspectives, our collective understanding is incomplete. And when children tell us who they are, we believe them, we celebrate them, we honor them, we advocate for them, and we thank them for their trust. The next piece of connection that I see between Quaker spirituality and trans experience is difficult to describe because it is our respect for the indescribable. Early Quakers had a rich and varied lexicon for naming the sacred, mostly drawn from their intimate relationship with Jewish and Christian scriptures. They used metaphors like light, fountain, the lamb, as well as directly descriptive words like the capital T truth. They understood that there are things that are tender and beautiful and holy that are beyond our ability to label, and yet they reached for language anyway. And I see myself and other trans folks participate in a similar process all the time, that we try to find words, we gesture at our identities through metaphor, sometimes through humor. But like early Quakers, we also reject false equivalencies or oversimplifications. Early friends were so deeply rejected any symbol that they felt people used to demystify the holy, that they criticized water baptism, They criticized communion with bread and wine because it was so important to them to remember the actual experience that was true and not confuse it with a symbol. And in my experience as a trans person, I also see us rejecting the idea that the symbols that we use culturally to gesture at gender are the same as gender itself. Gender is not trucks and dolls. It's not pink and blue. It's not penis and vagina. And in that desire to name something without enclosing it, I see a lot of resonance between Quaker spirituality and gender liberation and my own experience. Since I'm not doing a PowerPoint presentation or anything visual like that, it's a little weird to say that these sections have headers in my mind, but they do. And this one is called, Why Are We So Beautiful? I love trans people. I think we are so cool. And I feel my spirits lifted when I'm in the presence of other trans people. And my most common reaction to meeting a new trans person is to look at them and internally, because otherwise it would be weird, say, oh my gosh, you are so beautiful. Transgenders are holy, and we bring something that is unique to the world. I think one of the truths that our beings remind people of is the truth that nothing in life is static. Everything changes, and change is holy. We have that understanding in so many different religious traditions. Buddhism speaks to impermanence. The Christian spiritual tradition has a whole story about how holy it was when Jesus just looked real different to everybody around him, that is called the Transfiguration. Even a fictional religion, for those who are familiar with Octavia Butler's Parable series. The main character in those novels is the teenage creator of a post-apocalyptic religion that says God is change. And so I think there is a way in which trans people's existence in the world evokes the power of that idea. And also that might explain why we're a little scary to people sometimes. I think another thing that is so amazing about trans people is our witness to authenticity and integrity. There are so few times when you will stand in front of a person and look at them and see the ways their integrity is manifesting in the world. And that to me is such a powerful and beautiful thing to see written on a person's presence. And I think, finally, as I spoke to a little bit before, I think that trans self-expression is so beautiful because it liberates people of all gender experiences. It broadens the field of our possibilities. I strongly believe that every law or practice or cultural shift that benefits trans people and makes the world safer for us benefits every person and makes the world safer for all of us. Each of those practices mean that the boxes of gender get stretched and sometimes they break. And that means that every person in the world has a little more elbow room. And with June beginning today, I think it's also worth remembering that you only need to go to a Pride March to see how beautiful it is when people celebrate gender as a playground instead of a cage. I was living in the city of Philadelphia during the time that Michael Brown and George Floyd and Eric Garner and Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice and so many other Black people were killed by police. I was living in Philadelphia when so many of the cops who killed those people were found not guilty in a court of law. Which meant for me that during the time I lived there, it was not uncommon for me to be on the street as part of a march. And in those marches, there was one chant that was, I don't know if it was the one that we said the most frequently, but it's the one that touched me most deeply. And I'm going to invite you all to say it with me today. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other.
We must love each other, support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
I learned afterward that this chant comes from the autobiography of Assata Shakur, a Black liberation activist who was a target of state violence. And it has rattled around in me ever since that time, and it came roaring back after Donald Trump was elected president of the United States for a second time. I found myself with the first two lines of that chant in my mind and heart as if I were praying without ceasing, because I was. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. In this last part of my talk, I want to talk a little bit about what I believe it looks like to fight for our freedom and what I believe it looks like to win. As I think about the fight for our freedom, I think about how we each work to liberate ourselves, how we work as part of communities to liberate our communities, and how we attend to the work of global liberation of all peoples. I think that sometimes it is helpful to pull those apart in order to talk about them each in more depth, but I don't believe they ever actually exist separately. I think they're completely intertwined with one another. When I think about self-liberation, I think about the things I have had to teach myself in order to be as whole as I can possibly be in the world. Specifically in relation to trans identity, I've had to teach myself that the gender that people identify when you are born does not dictate in any way what your gender might be later in your life. And that sounds so obvious, but it is so hard to take that in and take it in deeper and take it in deeper until you really truly believe it. I've had to teach myself that trans people are beautiful because there are so many other messages about who and what we are. I've had to teach myself what it means to hold space for myself and for other people. And when I say I have taught myself, I mean hundreds of other people have taught me. And I have picked up what they have handed to me and taken it into my heart. I believe that the work of self-liberation is the process of accepting the liberatory messages that we are handed, looking for them if they are not handed to us, and taking them into our hearts. And then as we relate to those on deeper and deeper levels, to then begin to expect that those around us will treat us with dignity and respect in accordance with those truths we have learned. When I think about community liberation, I think about how important it has been to me for my own well-being to join community of activists and find ways to take action on issues that impact me and other people I'm in community with. It was transformational for me. And I'm going to describe this as if it's a thing that I have learned and is complete, but it is not. It was transformational for me when I started to learn that solidarity and work for the liberation of all people is not something that you have an obligation to do on behalf of others. It is a practice of wholeness. And it makes it possible for me to keep my heart open and stay alive and present in the world. Because otherwise, if I didn't know I was participating in something, that heart openness would break me. And I think it would break any of us who truly related to that and did nothing. And I I don't want you to hear me meaning any particular thing when I say do something, because I don't. There are so many different ways that this looks for different people based on what our gifts are, what our opportunities are, the times that we're living in, and how we're called in any given stage of our lives. But something. For me, some of the ways that has looked is showing up at marches, showing up consistently enough that people felt they could turn to me for support for those actions. Sometimes it's meant writing to or showing up at the offices of my elected officials. Literally, God knows if that does anything. But the attempt means something to me. And more than anything else, community liberation for me has meant support for the others, for the people I'm in direct relationship with. One of the greatest blessings of my life is getting to be in community with trans young people who I've gotten to support and uplift and encourage and high five and love. And when I think about global liberation, I think about remembering the interconnectedness of all movements for liberation. I think about every form of liberation that I believe to be directly connected to trans liberation, which includes the liberation of Palestine. It includes Indigenous sovereignty. It includes the rights of women. It includes the protection of the planet. And if we have an opportunity to sit down together sometime, I could tell you how I see the connections between any one of those things and the liberation of trans people. But it all comes down to my belief in, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, no one is free when others are oppressed. And finally, how do we win? A few months before I began working on this talk, I attended a conference on transgender health and well-being. And the keynote speaker for this conference was a trans historian named Eli Ehrlich. And in the question and answer period of this presentation, someone asked Eli, as a scholar of history, looking at what's happening today with trans rights, what is the story that you would tell? Why is this happening now? How does it relate to what's been happening at other moments in trans history? And Eli said, paraphrasing liberally, this is happening because we're winning. This is the backlash to the work of liberation that has already been accomplished. And it is freaking so many people out so much that they are throwing giant hissy fits all over the place that are causing very real danger. Very real danger. But it doesn't mean we're not winning. It doesn't mean we haven't, in some senses, already won. And so as I worked on this talk and thought about that perspective that was shared, I thought, I thought about shifting the question to how do we keep going? Which, for me, at least in this moment of time, and I think for many people, is not a small question. And what I believe the first answer to that question is we stay alive. And then we look to the possibility of thriving. And every person's toolkit for doing that is going to look different. For me, the toolkit includes mental health care. It includes remembering to breathe and breathing in intentional ways. It includes doing weird little EMDR somatic stuff with my body where I go, I'm brushing it off, or I do a little bit of this stuff. Nobody's taught you to do that stuff. It's good stuff. You should go find somebody to teach you how to do it. It's not that hard. In other people's toolkits might be social services, might be hotlines like the Trans Lifeline. Whatever it is that you need to have in your toolkit for staying here and hopefully at some point thriving. I hope you will ask for help getting into your toolkit. Which leads into another thing that I believe about how we continue winning, how we stay here for it, is that we care for one another. And this feels to me like it circles right back to the beginning of my talk about Quaker spirituality. I have been so blessed to have rich and deep community connections through my life as a friend. And that includes folks who I'm sitting here with in Albuquerque Monthly Meetings Meetinghouse. It includes folks whose faces I saw on Zoom, and many, many more. And that care is spiritual, it's practical, it's emotional, it's listening support, it's, I heard you're not feeling well, can I bring you dinner support? We build relationships and community at all of those levels simultaneously, and that's how it works. I don't mean that's how it is. I mean, that's how it thrives, how it prospers, how we continue to build. Finally, I believe that we continue to win by absolutely refusing to disconnect any struggle for liberation from all struggles for liberation. And the world will ask us to do this over and over and over and over and over again. One of the places where trans people have experienced this most clearly is in the historic and ongoing political negotiations about whether people can make enough progress while still including us in that progress, which is a question that is broken from the very beginning. And it's also something that trans folks are asked to do all the time. Well, if you didn't bring in Palestine, it wouldn't be so divisive. If you didn't bring in every other point of connection to our struggle, then maybe, maybe you would be acceptable enough, which is a request that is broken from the beginning. One more way that I ground myself and stay here for the winning is through poetry. And I want to share the beginning of a poem by a poet who I love, Aurora Levins Morales. And then I want to share a little bit of my response or addition to her poem. Va'ahavta. Say these words when you lie down and when you rise up, when you go out and when you return, in times of mourning and in times of joy. Inscribe them on your doorposts, embroider them on your garments, tattoo them on your shoulders, teach them to your children, your neighbors, your enemies. Recite them in your sleep, here in the cruel shadow of empire. Another world is possible. Imagine winning. This is your sacred task. This is your power. Imagine every detail of winning. The exact smell of the summer streets in which no one has been shot. The muscles you have never unclenched from worry, gone soft as newborn skin. The sparkling taste of food when we know that no one on earth is hungry, that the beggars are fed. And I add, picture the grin on the face of a trans girl who is twirling in her first dress. Imagine the deep sleep of a parent who is not trying to figure out whether they need to flee the country to protect their child. Match your inhale and exhale with the gentle, even breathing of a young person who knows they will never have to go through a puberty that makes them feel like a stranger in their body. Imagine a teen looking in the mirror and for the first time ever thinking, beautiful. Let your spine lengthen and your muscles loosen in the way they would if you loved yourself every moment of every day, because no one ever taught you otherwise. Imagine the light up the room smile of a child who just got the haircut he's always wanted and got called young man at the drive-up window. Imagine we all smile like that. Imagine it breaks open the world.
Kody, thank you so much for your message. I'm a little jealous of our friends online with their rising hearts, because that's how I've been feeling listening to your message. I felt my heart rising. I felt this profound living out of testimonies of truth and integrity, of offering a witness in your specific voice, telling us what only you can tell us in this time and place. And I'm so grateful. Thank you. This is our opportunity to join in conversation with Kody and in another way of living out Kody's commitment to centering trans voices. They've invited us into a practice of centering trans voices in this question and answer as well. So we are going to invite friends online to use the question and answer function. Friends here in the barn, there's paper and pens to write. And I believe in Albuquerque, similarly, there are pens and paper to write. And if you identify as trans or questioning and want your question prioritized, please put an asterisk on your question. And we will collate these questions, and Maddie will join us up front, I think, as well. And begin to be in dialogue with Kody. We'll give folks a few minutes to write your questions and to hold and incorporate the message Kody's shared. Kody, as we're waiting, I'm wondering if we can start with you sharing a bit about your process for preparing for this, for sharing this message. It's a unique format for how our First Monday lectures have sometimes been shared, and it felt so grounded and so clear. And I'd love to hear a bit more about how you came to deliver.
It sounds like you're referring to something specific, Francis. Can you tell me what it is?
What were you thinking of? How did you come to this message, or what process? What were you listening to externally or internally? What practices helped you stay open to this message?
Yeah. I spoke with Francis a little bit early on about how many times I've given kind of trans 101 talks or, answer cis people's questions talks. And I told her that I didn't want to do that for this one. And I had started to. It's a well-worn track in my head. I know how to walk it. I started to write that talk. Um, and then an example of community, I was at my friend Holly's house, hanging out with her cat while she was away on vacation and working on this talk. And I just had one of those moments of clarity that is a little easier to have outside of your own house that said, that's not this talk. Um, when I've given other talks before in Quaker spaces that felt like I was holding them not in a secular way, as a lecture that I was going to give, but in a Quaker way as ministry that I was listening for to try to faithfully let come through me. Um, Sometimes I've written a lot of things down in advance, and sometimes I've written almost no things down in advance. So that was also part of the um, discernment process for me of trying to listen to whether I was being given ideas or pointed in directions, or if I was being given specific words to write down to bring. Um, and it was also such a joy to work with Francis to figure out if this hybrid two places at once also online thing could work. Because I'm a relatively new member of Albuquerque Monthly Meeting. Um, and I feel so much joy about rooting myself in this community, that I didn't just want to do this talk at home on Zoom looking at my computer. I wanted to be held by all of you and also invite you to experience it with me. Um, but it is also such a joy that we could do that without losing the presence of all of these other folks who have been with us to listen and share, many of whom I have known and loved for a long time. And Francis, if there was anything else specific, will you?
I wasn't actually getting at anything particular.
Okay, great.
Thank you so
Cool.
much.
Hi, folks. This is Maddie. I was behind the computer. I want to uplift two comments that friends have shared. One says, "Thank you, Kody. You speak to my condition." Another one says, "Just sharing gratitude and love for you and the messages of liberation and love that you shared today. Thank you, Kody." That's a general sentiment of many of the folks who are online. And one question for you. God is not any gender and doesn't think of God's self as gender. Do you have any sense of why gender matters so much to all of us humans? Do you imagine that it may not always be so?
Hmm. There are a lot of things that are really annoying about gender, and then some things that I'm kind of a fan of about gender. And one of the things that I'm kind of a fan of is I don't really understand it at all. So I think that's my answer is I think that the doors that I have tried to open in my own mind and heart and offer to open for other people, um, are ones that I think lead to paths of discovery, including I don't know if gender would matter if we followed this process of liberation and listening and compassion all the way to somewhere else. It might and it might not. And I hope that we get to find out.
few more from the room. Not questions, but affirmations. One, I loved your lecture. I am a trans woman, and as a fellow trans person, I'd like to hear your insight into the relationship between transgenderism, queerness, and family.
Hmm.
And second, staying alive, possibility to thrive and care for one another. Yes, I see that in the resilience of other oppressed too. Another heart coming from the room.
If you were to go back and talk to some of your teachers from your childhood, what might you want them to know?
Hmm. I also don't want to lose the one about transness, queerness, and family. I hope I don't go through this whole Q&A session saying I don't know to every question, but that's very possible. And I love that question. And I think I will say the one thing that comes up for me very strongly in response to that is how much my experience of being queer and trans has invited me to expand my understanding of family. I have incredible parents who I treasure deeply, and I'm very grateful that my understanding of queer chosen family hasn't come from a place of rejection. But for many queer folks, it does. For me, I just have experienced the blessings of being part of a community of folks who, at least in my experience, do a lot of tending to our connections with one another without, again, I think this is a theme of everything I'm saying, asking those connections to fit into specific boxes and labels. I have, it's a joke about queer community, but like my exes are my posse. We love each other. Like I have all of these connections with people that are kind of outside of rigid definition and are so deeply sustaining to me. And I don't know if that is anywhere in the neighborhood of where that question was coming from. But that's what I think of is that gratitude for big expansive definitions that I think is a gift of queerness, and a gift that queerness can scatter around like glitter to everyone else. And then, Maddie, the question that you asked after that was if I could go back and tell anything to my teachers, what would it be? I was really lucky as a child that I knew that trans people existed. And the only reason I knew that was through my Quaker community. Because there were multiple trans folks in the broader Quaker community that my family was part of when I was growing up in Florida. There was nothing ever in any other context that gave me that information. And it would have been great information, even though I got it from one source, to have from multiple different sources, because I think that would have reinforced that being trans is a thing that is normal and accepted and beautiful everywhere. And I think probably one of the reasons why I've ended up being so deeply committed to Quaker community is that that was the place where I got that clear affirmation of you are welcome here and who you are is valued here. And that doesn't mean that I haven't had immensely difficult experiences as a trans person in Quaker community, but it's powerful, those early messages that you get, and where you get them from. And so if I could go back and talk to my teachers, I would say, please put yourselves in a time machine and go to 2026 when we have a beautiful plethora of books for kids about gender diversity, and bring some of those books back to your libraries and read them aloud to your kids. Which I say that way to acknowledge that they were working with limited resources, and but teachers now are working with much more abundant resources. And there are incredible books, and please ask me about them because I would love to tell you about them.
A friend asks, in a time when the backlash to us winning is so strong and so dangerous, how do we balance living with integrity as trans people and as any other marginalized identity, and the need to stay alive, and lesser but still very real safety concerns? I've been struggling with this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Once again, I don't know, and nothing you do to survive can injure the integrity that you have as a person. I know that it feels that way. I feel that all the time, that conflict between how much am I going to put myself out there? What am I called to do? How do I protect myself? And so I guess what I'm saying is, while I recognize that there are times when we sustain moral injury because we can't keep ourselves safe and live in integrity the way we would like to, you are not morally or ethically responsible for the decisions you make to keep yourself alive and the gap between those and the integrity that you would like to be living with. And I will also try to remember to tell myself that. And if that's unsatisfying, I know. I know it is.
I would love to hear more about the people who have helped remind you to love being trans. I have so many people who I hold close to my bleeding trans heart. They made me who I
Um, the first person who comes to mind is somebody who I got to mentor when they were a young person, and now am continuously nourished in friendship with, who's Kai Quirk, who's done incredible work with poetry and photography, showcasing the beauty and sacredness of trans people. Kai's book, They Don't Pay Me to Say This, is amazing. And features all of these self-portraits where they're part of, like they make their body part of this beautiful natural scene that they're photographing. And their photography reminds me how natural our bodies are and how whole they are. It would take me a long time to name all of the people, and I would be afraid of missing some, but that's one person who comes to mind. I think one more person I'll name in particular, because many folks who are here may also know her, is Petra from my home Quaker community, who was that first trans person whose existence I knew about, who, gosh, I think, like took so much of the initial wave of people's bullshit of reactions, and at least from my perspective as a child, continued just embodying her transition and her truth with so much grace. She was one of my earliest teachers about how beautiful trans people are.
As the mother of a trans teenage girl, I am always looking for ways to show my love and support. Do you have any recommendations to add to my toolbox?
I feel like if you're here for this talk, you probably know all the 101 things that I would tell people. And if you don't, please go to my website, transyouthcoaching.org, and schedule a consultation. I will tell you all the 101 things for free. I think in response to that, I want to affirm what you're doing right now, which is listening to trans folks talk in a way that is not pressured or filtered or repackaged to be more palatable for cis people. Our voices are so powerful. There's such a range of different experiences of being trans, just immense. Like as many experiences as there are of being human, that's how many experiences there are of being trans. And I think, making space to welcome in the stories and sharings of other trans-identified folks is a really powerful thing for you to do as a parent, and I'm glad that you're here doing it. And you can also book a consultation for non-101 things, and it's still free.
Actually, I'm gonna interrupt. Yeah, Kody, can you tell us a little bit more about trans youth coaching now that you mentioned it?
I sure can. This past year, I left my full-time job as a Quaker youth worker, and I got training as a coach. And I started this project called Trans Youth Coaching. And the purpose of trans youth coaching is to offer supportive conversations for trans kids or their family members or both, at no cost to clients. So there is no financial barrier. And I also do some workshops and writing and other kinds of educational pieces. But I see the one-on-one direct support as kind of the core of what that project is for. And I'm able to do it at no cost to people because I have an awesome community of donors, a lot of whom give monthly. So I know that there is at least a little bit of money coming in every month, and I don't yet need to stop doing this and get a different job. So I welcome you to become part of that community of people supporting this project. There are also other incredible organizations that are supporting trans young people in this political moment. And that includes, if you're here in Albuquerque, the Transgender Resource Center that is around the corner from us. That includes, for folks anywhere in the US, Trans Lifeline, who I spoke about in the kind of toolboxes for self-care, is an incredible resource, crisis hotline, mental health support hotline, with a commitment not to call the police on people, which can often be very dangerous for trans folks, if the police are called on them without their consent when they're in mental health crisis. Yeah. And my website information, I think, will be in the follow-up resources email that goes out to folks who have attended this talk. And you can find some of the writing that I've done on that website, and also a more extended resources section pointing to other books and videos and sources of information that I think is solid about supporting trans kids. Good segue, Francis, thanks.
Thank you for sharing. Transparently, one of my hopes in inviting you to give this talk was for you to share more about this incredible resource you're offering to the world. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So we have more questions than we have time for, so thank you to everyone who has submitted questions. And I think the last one to end on, I have been thinking about how trans narratives help us to escape binary thinking in theology, in ecology, in politics. Where have you seen voices exploring this? Or do you have writing on escaping binary boxes beyond gender and sexuality?
Wow, I love that. And also the hardest thing for me as I get more tired is remembering names. So that might be a question that I answer in an email to Pendle Hill that they can send out the answer to with that resource email, with the follow-up email. Okay, so theology, ecology, and politics. Yeah, I'm gonna let that like hang out in my mind and body for a little bit, and then like see what answers come up later tonight and tomorrow. Thank you. That's a beautiful question and very true.
Kody, thank you so much again. Are there any final words you want to share as we come to a close?
I'm really grateful to you all for being here, for holding space with me. It's hard for me to express how much it means in this moment in the world, for people to show up with love, to join the work of transformation. So much love to you all at Pendle Hill, on Zoom, and here. Thank you.
Kody, thank you for being one of Pendle Hill's teachers. we're really, really lucky to get to keep learning from you. And this will also be shared in the follow-up email, but there's lots of opportunities to continue to learn with Kody and other teachers of ours coming up as we're heading into celebrating Pride Month. We're offering a program with Kody and friend O called Love Tending the Soil of Our Sanctuaries, an online workshop for people of faith working for LGBTQIA plus inclusion and liberation to gather in community. There's going to be one workshop for folks with queer and trans identities coming up on June 25th, and another for folks with cis het identities on July 9th. And there will be a final workshop for everyone who attends one of those first two. You can find out about that and all of our other upcoming opportunities at pendlehill.org/learn. And I also want to celebrate that Kody and many other amazing leaders will be coming to campus here at Pendle Hill from August 7th to 9th for Dreaming Sanctuary, the intergenerational LGBTQ plus gathering for renewal, rejuvenation, and relationship building. It's a highlight of my year, and I hope that you will share with others who might be interested. And I'm really excited to be working with Kody about to develop a number of resources related to that program that we'll be sharing as well. Finally, I wanted to remind our loyal First Monday attenders that the summer is a really busy time especially for Friends. So we're going to have a bit of a summer pause. For July and August, we won't have our traditional First Monday lecture. We'll pick up again the second Monday of August for an online program with C. Wes Daniels about the 500th Pendle Hill pamphlet that he'll be publishing. So that is something to look forward to. And we will miss you in the meantime, but excited to continue our learning and community online, on campus, through our daily worship and all the other ways we get to stay connected. So with that, I will invite us back into worship to hold in the light the message that we've heard, and all the ways, the opportunities that present themselves to bring it into our lives.